Every parent's worst nightmare is losing their child in the wilderness. For one family, that terror became reality when 10-year-old Emily wandered into the woods and didn't come back. She had only wanted a quiet walk away from the busy family reunion at her cousin's farmhouse. But darkness fell, and she was lost. Emily spent a frightening night alone, curled beneath a pine tree. When morning came, she woke up surrounded by golden retrievers, forming a protective circle around her. One scarred dog seemed different from the rest. When rescuers arrived, this same dog led them straight to Emily. The mystery grew when they learned the dog's past. He had belonged to Diane, a woman who had stopped working with rescue animals after losing her own daughter years before. The dog had been missing for months. Why did he appear at exactly the right moment to save Emily? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first light of dawn crept across the Miller family farm like a gentle promise, painting the weathered barn in shades of gold and amber. It should have been a peaceful morning, the kind that makes a person pause and appreciate the simple beauty of rural life. Instead, it carried the weight of every parent's darkest fear. Margaret Miller stood on the wraparound porch, her coffee mug trembling in her hands as she watched her nephew Danny sprint across the dewy pasture toward the main house. Even from a distance, she could see the panic etched in his 13-year-old frame. The family reunion had been going so well. 23 relatives gathered from across 3 states, sharing stories and laughter until well past midnight. The children had been particularly excited, running through the fields, exploring the old barn, creating the kind of memories that would last a lifetime. Aunt Maggie. Danny's voice cracked as he reached the porch steps, his chest heaving from the run. Emily's not in the bunkhouse. Her sleeping bag is empty, and Sarah says she never came to bed last night. The coffee mug slipped from Margaret's fingers, shattering against the wooden planks. Emily Henderson, her 10-year-old grandniece from Chicago, had been the quietest of the visiting children, while the others played raucous games of hide-and-seek and told ghost stories. Emily had preferred to sit on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. She'd seemed thoughtful, almost melancholy, though Margaret had attributed it to the recent divorce of Emily's parents. "Are you certain she's not hiding somewhere?" Margaret asked, though her heart already knew the answer. Emily wasn't the type of child to cause worry deliberately. "We looked everywhere," Danny said, his voice small. "The barn, the chicken coop, even under the old oak tree where she liked to read." Sarah found her sketchbook by the back fence, but Emily's nowhere. Within minutes, the peaceful morning dissolved into controlled chaos. Margaret's husband Frank emerged from the house, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the gathering crowd of relatives. Phone calls were made, voices hushed but urgent. Emily's parents, divorced but united in their terror, were driving through the night from Chicago. Local neighbors began arriving without being asked. That's how it worked in rural communities. When someone needed help, you showed up. As the impromptu search party organized itself in the farmyard, one figure remained notably absent from the group. Diane Hartwell stood at her kitchen window, watching the commotion from her property next door. At 66, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to bear grief with grace. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her weathered hands gripped a cup of tea that had long since grown cold. Frank Miller approached her back door, his boots heavy on her wooden steps. They'd been neighbors for over a decade, maintaining the polite distance that rural folks understood. Diane kept to herself, and Frank respected that boundary, even when he'd sometimes wondered about the lonely woman who lived surrounded by memories of a different life. "Morning, Diane," he said, removing his worn baseball cap. "I hate to bother you, but we've got a situation." My grandniece, Emily, is missing. 10 years old, about 4 feet tall, dark hair. She was wearing a blue sweater and jeans when we last saw she'd wandered off the property. Diane's expression remained carefully neutral, but Frank noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. How long has she been gone? Since sometime yesterday evening. We think maybe around sunset. Frank's voice carried the weight of mounting desperation. Diane, I know this might be asking too much, but you used to work search and rescue. We could really use someone with your experience. The silence stretched between them like a bridge. Neither wanted to cross. Frank knew enough about Diane's past to understand why she might hesitate. The whole community remembered when she'd been the go-to person for missing persons cases, working with her specially trained dogs to find lost hikers and children. That was before the accident that took her daughter, Sarah, before Diane had withdrawn from the world, letting her search and rescue certification lapse and her training equipment gather dust. I don't do that work anymore, Diane said quietly, but Frank could hear the conflict in her voice. I understand, and I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. The state police are sending a team, but they won't arrive for hours. Emily's just a little girl, and she's been out there all night. All night. Frank's voice broke slightly. Her parents are driving down from Chicago. They're going to want to know we did everything we could. Diane closed her eyes, and for a moment, Frank glimpsed the pain she carried. When she opened them again, something had shifted. I'll get my boots, she said. The search party that assembled in the Miller farmyard was an impressive sight. 37 volunteers ranging in age from teenage Danny to 74-year-old Mrs. Henderson, Emily's great-grandmother, who had insisted on coming despite her arthritis. Frank had divided them into teams, each covering a different section of the property and surrounding woodland. The plan was methodical, professional, exactly what one would expect from a community that understood the serious business of finding a lost child. Diane arrived carrying a faded canvas backpack that looked like it had seen decades of use. Inside, Frank glimpsed the tools of her former trade: topographical maps, a compass, emergency medical supplies, and a whistle worn smooth by countless training sessions. She moved with quiet authority as she studied the hand-drawn map Frank had sketched, asking pointed questions about Emily's personality, her likely behavior patterns, and the timeline of her disappearance. She's not an outdoor child, Margaret explained, wrapping her sweater tighter against the morning chill. Emily lives in an apartment in Chicago. This is only her second visit to the farm. But she's smart and careful, not the type to take foolish risks. That works in our favor, Diane said, marking several locations on the map. Inexperienced children often stay near water sources or follow clear paths. They don't usually venture into the dense undergrowth. As the teams prepared to fan out, across the property, a distant sound caught Diane's attention. Barking. Not the sharp, aggressive bark of a guard dog, but something different. More melodic, almost conversational. She turned toward the sound, her trained ear analyzing the vocal patterns. Those are the strays, Frank said, noticing her interest. Pack of golden retrievers that showed up about 8 months ago. Nobody knows where they came from, but they've been living in the woods between our properties. Friendly enough, but they keep their distance from people. Diane's expression shifted subtly. 8 months ago? The timing sent a chill down her spine, but she pushed the thought aside. This wasn't about her own losses. This was about finding Emily. The search began in earnest as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning dew. Teams spread across the 200-acre property, calling Emily's name and checking every possible hiding place. Diane worked alone, her movements methodical and purposeful as she examined the ground for signs of passage. Near the back fence line, she found Emily's sketchbook, exactly where Danny had said it would be. The drawings inside revealed a sensitive, artistic child who noticed details others might miss. The way light fell across the barn roof, The gentle expression of a grazing cow, the intricate pattern of leaves against sky. More importantly, Diane found footprints. Small sneaker prints in the soft earth near the fence, leading toward the tree line. The tracks were clear enough to follow, at least initially. Emily had climbed through the fence and entered the woods sometime around sunset, just as Frank had suspected. As Diane followed the trail deeper into the forest, the morning sounds of the search party gradually faded behind her. Here, in the quiet cathedral of pine and oak, she felt the familiar tug of her old calling. Her hands moved automatically, checking the underbrush for caught fabric, examining disturbed leaves, reading the subtle signs that most people would never notice. It had been 5 years since she'd done this work, but the skills remained sharp, waiting just beneath the surface of her carefully constructed solitude. The trail led steadily upward, following what appeared to be a deer path winding through increasingly dense forest. Emily had been methodical in her movement, staying on the clear path rather than pushing through underbrush. That suggested intelligence and caution, which gave Diane hope. But it also meant the girl had ventured much farther from the farm than anyone had expected. By noon, the official search and rescue team had arrived from the state capital, bringing with them helicopters, trained dogs, and sophisticated equipment. Diane watched from a distance as they set up their command post, part of her grateful for the professional backup, another part of her remembering what it felt like to be in charge of such operations. The lead officer, a woman about 40 years, old named Captain Rodriguez, sought her out specifically. "You're Diane Hartwell," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard stories about your work. We could use your local knowledge and experience." "I was hoping you'd say that," Diane replied. "I've been tracking the child's movement." She went much farther into the woods than anyone expected. As afternoon stretched into evening, the search took on increasing urgency. Emily had now been missing for nearly 24 hours. Her parents had arrived from Chicago, haggard and desperate, clinging to each other despite their divorce. The sight of their raw anguish brought back memories Diane had spent years trying to suppress. She remembered standing in a similar crowd 5 years ago, waiting for news about Sarah, knowing with growing certainty that her daughter was never coming home. But this was different. Emily was lost, not gone. There was still hope, still time. And somewhere in these woods, a 10-year-old girl was waiting to be found. As darkness fell for the second time since Emily's disappearance, Diane made a decision that surprised even herself. She would spend the night in the woods, continuing the search when the official teams were forced to suspend operations due to safety concerns. It went against protocol, against common sense, and against every instinct for self-preservation she developed since Sarah's death. But sometimes, the heart knows what the mind cannot accept. And Diane's heart was telling her that Emily Henderson was still alive, still waiting, still hoping that someone would find her before it was too late. The second dawn brought with it a quality of light that seemed almost sacred, as if nature itself understood the gravity of the situation. Diane had spent the night camped at the edge of a small clearing, dozing fitfully in her sleeping bag while straining to hear any sound that might indicate a child's presence. The forest had been unusually quiet, as though holding its breath. In anticipation, she woke to the distant sound of helicopters resuming their search pattern and the muffled voices of ground teams, organizing for another day of systematic coverage. But there was something else, a sound that made her sit up abruptly, her heart racing with sudden hope. A child's voice, faint, barely audible above the morning breeze, but unmistakably human. Diane was on her feet instantly, her trained senses focused entirely on isolating the direction of the sound. There northwest, perhaps half a mile away, coming from the direction of Hollow Creek. She moved quickly but carefully through the undergrowth, following game trails and natural clearings toward the sound. As she drew closer, she could make out individual words, Emily was talking to someone, her voice steady but tired. Diane's relief was so profound, it nearly brought her to her knees. The girl was alive, conscious, and apparently uninjured enough to speak normally. But who was she talking to? The answer revealed itself as Diane crested a small ridge and looked down into a natural hollow where Hollow Creek curved around a stand of ancient oak trees. There, in a scene that would be etched in her memory forever, sat Emily Henderson. She was propped against the trunk of the largest oak, wrapped in what appeared to be her blue sweater, talking quietly to a circle of golden retrievers that had arranged themselves around her like a tent of guardians. 6 dogs in total, their golden coats catching the morning light like spun copper. They sat with the disciplined posture of trained animals, alert but relaxed, clearly comfortable in their role as protectors. One dog, noticeably larger than the others and bearing several scars across his muzzle, lay directly beside Emily with his head resting near her feet. Even from a distance, Diane could see the careful way he monitored her every breath. "I know you probably have somewhere else to be," Emily was saying to the dogs, her voice carrying the earnest tone children use when speaking to animals they're certain understand every word. "But I'm really glad you stayed with me. I was pretty scared last night until you showed up." Diane approached slowly, not wanting to startle either the child or the dogs. As she drew nearer, the large scarred dog raised his head and fixed her with an intense stare. There was something unnervingly familiar about those intelligent brown eyes, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "Emily?" she called, softly. The girl looked up, her face brightening with relief and exhaustion. "Oh, thank goodness. Are you here to take me home? I tried to find my way back yesterday, but everything looked the same. These dogs found me just as it was getting dark. I think they saved my life." Diane knelt beside the child, her hands automatically checking for injuries, while her eyes remained fixed on the scarred dog. He hadn't moved from his protective position, but his tail gave a single, slow wag, a gesture of recognition that sent a chill down Diane's spine. "Are you hurt anywhere?" she asked Emily, forcing herself to focus on the immediate priorities. "Just tired and really thirsty. And hungry, but the dogs kept me warm all night. The big one especially. He let me use him like a pillow." Emily reached out to stroke the scarred dog's head. "I've been calling him Hero because he seems to be in charge of keeping me safe." Diane's hands trembled as she reached for her radio to call in the Discovery. But before she could activate it, the scarred dog stood and approached her directly. He sat at her feet with perfect posture, his head tilted slightly as if waiting for a command. Then Diane saw a thin line of faded leather around his neck, mostly hidden by his thick fur. With shaking fingers, she parted the golden hair and revealed a weathered training collar. The brass nameplate, green with age, was still legible. "Max, property of D. Hartwell. If found, please call." The rest was scratched away, but Diane didn't need to read her own phone number to know what she was looking at. "Max," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The dog's entire body quivered with excitement. His tail began wagging frantically, and he pressed his massive head against her chest in a gesture so familiar it brought tears to her eyes. This was Max, her Max, the golden retriever she had trained from puppyhood to be the finest search and rescue dog in the state. The same Max who had disappeared without a trace 8 months ago during a thunderstorm, leaving her convinced that her last connection to her former life had been severed forever. "You know him?" Emily asked, clearly delighted by the reunion she was witnessing. "I trained him," Diane managed to say around the lump in her throat. "He was my search and rescue partner for 7 years. He's been missing for 8 months. I thought he was dead." Max seemed to understand the weight of the moment. He sat back on his haunches and offered his paw to Diane in the gestures she had taught him as a puppy. It was his way of saying mission accomplished, the signal they had used at the end of every successful rescue operation. Diane keyed her radio with trembling fingers. "This is Diane Hartwell. I found Emily Henderson. She's alive and appears uninjured. We're at the Big Oak Grove near Hollow Creek, approximately 2 miles north of the Miller property." The response was immediate and jubilant. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the static. "Outstanding work. Diane, we're dispatching a medical team to your location immediately. Can you give us an ETA for extraction?" 20 minutes if we take the creek path," Diane replied. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Captain, you should know that Emily was protected through the night by a pack of stray dogs. They're still here, and they're not showing any signs of aggression, but your people should be aware." As they waited for the rescue team to arrive, Emily told Diane about her experience. She had followed the deer trail out of simple curiosity, never intending to go far from the farm. But the path had been more winding than she'd realized, and by the time she understood she was lost, darkness was falling fast. "I was really scared," Emily admitted. "I found this tree and tried to make myself as small as possible. I kept thinking about all those movies where people get eaten by wild animals. Then I heard them coming through the woods, and I thought I was done for." Instead, she explained, the golden retrievers had approached her with gentle caution. Max had been the first to approach, sniffing her carefully before lying down beside her. The others had followed his lead, arranging themselves in a protective circle that kept her warm through the surprisingly cold night. "They took turns staying awake," Emily said, her child's memory capturing details that amazed Diane. Max seemed to be giving them instructions. "And when I got really scared around midnight, he put his head on my lap and just stayed there until I calmed down." The medical team arrived with professional efficiency, checking Emily's vital signs and hydration levels while praising Diane's quick location work. Emily was dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. The lead paramedic, a kind woman named Janet, was particularly impressed by the child's composure. "Most kids would be traumatized by a night alone in the woods," Janet observed. "She seems remarkably calm." "I wasn't alone," Emily corrected matter-of-factly. "I had my guardians." As they prepared to transport Emily back, stacked the curious pack of golden retrievers that had remained throughout the medical examination, Max stayed close to Diane, as if sensing that this reunion might be as temporary as his previous disappearance. The other 5 dogs maintained their disciplined formation, watching the proceedings with the alert interest of animals who understood the importance of what was happening. "What happens to them now?" Emily asked as Janet prepared to carry her toward the waiting TV that would transport them out of the woods. It was a question Diane had been dreading. Under normal circumstances, the dogs would be taken to the county animal shelter for evaluation and possible adoption. But these weren't normal circumstances, and these weren't ordinary strays. They had demonstrated organized behavior, protective instincts, and a level of intelligence that suggested extensive training. "I don't know," Diane answered honestly. "But I promise you, Emily, they'll be taken care of." As the rescue party made its way back towards civilization, Max walked beside Diane with the measured pace of a working dog. The other retrievers followed, in loose formation, their golden coats gleaming in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the forest canopy. They moved with the quiet confidence of animals who had accomplished something significant and knew it. The reunion at the Miller farm was emotional beyond description. Emily's parents, Margaret and Frank, the assembled volunteers, everyone wept openly as the little girl was carried into the farmyard. But even in the midst of the celebration, questions lingered. How had the dogs known to find Emily? Where had they come from? And why had Max, a dog trained for search and rescue, disappeared for 8 months only to surface at the exact moment when his skills were needed most desperately? as Emily was loaded into an ambulance for transport to the regional hospital for a complete medical evaluation. She caught Diane's hand. "You'll make sure Max knows I said thank you, won't you?" she asked. "And tell him I hope I see him again soon." Diane squeezed the child's small hand. "I promise," she said, though she had no idea how she could possibly keep such a promise. The golden retrievers had vanished as quietly as they had appeared, melting back into the forest like spirits returning to their realm. All except Max, who sat patiently beside Diane's truck as if waiting for permission to come home. Standing in the Miller farmyard, watching the ambulance disappear down the dusty road that would take Emily back to her worried parents and her normal life, Diane faced a decision she had never expected to confront. Max was looking at her with those intelligent brown eyes, his entire posture communicating a simple message: "I'm ready to go home now." But was she ready to let him back into her life? And more importantly, was she ready to face the questions his return would inevitably raise about the night Sarah died, the months of grief that followed, and the possibility that some bonds between human and animal transcend even death itself? The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and those peculiar industrial flowers that seem to exist only in medical facilities. Emily sat propped up against white pillows and foredrip in her small arm, looking remarkably composed for a child who had spent a night lost in the wilderness. Her parents flanked her bed, her mother Lisa holding her hand with the desperate grip of someone who had almost lost everything. Her father Michael, pacing by the window with the restless energy of a man processing trauma through movement. Diane stood in the doorway, uncertain whether her presence was welcome or intrusive. She had come to check on Emily's condition, but truthfully, she was also seeking answers to questions that had been haunting her since the moment she saw Max sitting beside the lost child. The coincidences were too numerous, too perfectly timed, to dismiss as random chance. "Miss Hartwell." Emily's face brightened when she spotted Diane. "Mom, Dad, this is the lady I told you about. She's the one who found me, and she knows Max." Lisa Henderson rose from her chair, her eyes still red from crying but filled with profound gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, embracing Diane with surprising warmth. "The doctors say Emily is going to be fine. Dehydrated and exhausted, but no lasting harm. I'm just glad we found her in time," Diane replied, accepting the hug awkwardly. She had never been comfortable with displays of emotion from strangers, even when those emotions were justified. Michael approached from the window, extending his hand in the formal manner of someone more accustomed to boardroom interactions than family crises. "Lisa's right, we can never adequately thank you. The search captain said you worked through the night to track Emily's path. That kind of dedication, ... It's what anyone would have done," Diane said, deflecting the praise that made her uncomfortable. "I used to do search and rescue work. Old habits." "Tell me about Max," Emily interjected, her child's directness cutting through the adult pleasantries. "How long have you known him? Where did he learn to take care of people like that?" Diane pulled a chair closer to Emily's bed, glancing at the girl's parents for permission before sitting down. "I got Max when he was 8 weeks old," she began, surprised by how easily the memories flowed. "He was the smallest puppy in the litter, but also the most determined. From the very beginning, he showed signs of being special." She found herself telling Emily about Max's training, the months of patient work teaching him to track scents, to navigate difficult terrain, to locate missing persons and signal their position to rescue teams. What she didn't mention was Sarah, her daughter, who had been Max's primary trainer during his early years. That story was too complicated, too painful to share with a child who was still processing her own trauma. "He disappeared 8 months ago," Diane continued, "during a thunderstorm. I searched for weeks, put up posters, contacted every shelter in 3 counties. I thought something terrible had happened to him. But he was okay, Emily said with the simple faith of childhood. He was just waiting for the right time to help someone. The innocence of that statement hit Diane harder than she had expected. Out of the mouths of babes, she thought, remembering her own grandmother's favorite saying. Sometimes it took a child to articulate truths that adults made too complicated. After promising Emily she would visit again soon, Diane made her way to the county animal shelter where the other 5 golden retrievers had been taken for evaluation. The shelter director, a competent woman named Carol Martinez, met her in the lobby with a puzzled expression. "I've been working with animals for 15 years, Carol said, leading Diane toward the kennels, "and I've never seen anything quite like this pack. They're healthy, well socialized, and clearly have had extensive training. But there's no record of them in any of our databases." The 5 dogs were housed together in the shelter's largest enclosure, a spacious run with both indoor and outdoor access. They sat in a perfect semicircle, alert but calm, watching Diane's approach with intelligent eyes. Their coats gleamed with health, despite months of living wild, and their behavior suggested discipline and training, rather than the typical patterns of feral animals. "Have you been able to determine their ages?" Diane asked, studying each dog carefully. "The vet estimates they're all between 3 and 6 years old," Carol replied. "Prime working age for service or rescue animals. But here's the strange part. They seem to be waiting for something. They eat regularly, interact appropriately when we handle them, but there's a sense that they're just biding their time." Diane knelt beside the fence, extending her hand toward the closest dog, a female with particularly expressive eyes. The retriever approached slowly, sniffed her hand with careful attention, then sat and offered her paw in the same gesture Max had demonstrated that morning. "They're search and rescue trained," Diane said with certainty. "All of them. This is the standard greeting sequence we teach for public interaction." Carol's eyebrows rose. "Are you saying someone trained 6 golden retrievers for search and rescue work and then just turned them loose in the woods?" "I'm saying it's possible," Diane replied, though the implications troubled her deeply. Training a single search and rescue dog required months of intensive work and significant financial investment. Training 6 dogs to work as a coordinated pack would require resources and expertise that few individuals possessed. That evening, Diane sat in her kitchen with Max lying contentedly at her feet, feeling more at peace than she had in months. The dog had settled back into her house as if he had never been away, moving through familiar routines with the easy confidence of an animal returning home. Yet questions nagged at her consciousness like persistent insects. She climbed the stairs to her attic, a space she rarely visited anymore because it held too many memories. Her search and rescue equipment was stored here, carefully maintained despite her retirement from active duty. But tonight she was looking for something specific. Sarah's training journals. Her daughter had been meticulous about documenting Max's development, recording not just his progress in formal training exercises, but also her observations about his personality, his intuitive responses to different situations, and his remarkable ability to anticipate the needs of the people around him. Sarah had been convinced that Max possessed abilities beyond the normal range of canine intelligence. Diane found the journals in a wooden crate beneath a dust cover, along with Sarah's other belongings that she had never been able to bring herself to sort through. The first journal was dated 5 years ago, when Max was barely a year old. Sarah's handwriting was precise and scientific, reflecting her background in veterinary studies. Day 127. Max demonstrated unusual behavioral patterns during today's tracking exercise. When we reached the victim training volunteer, Max didn't just alert to the location. He approached the person and seemed to assess their emotional state. He remained close to volunteers who appeared nervous or uncomfortable, but maintained standard distance from those who were confident and relaxed. This suggests he's reading human emotional cues at a much more sophisticated level than typical rescue dogs. Diane flipped through several pages, finding entry after entry documenting Max's exceptional abilities. Sarah had been particularly interested in his responses to different types of emergencies, noting that he seemed to adjust his behavior based on the specific needs of each situation. Day 203. Remarkable incident today. Max was working with a training scenario involving a lost child, 8-year-old volunteer. The child became genuinely upset during the exercise, crying and expressing real fear despite knowing it was just training. Max abandoned the standard protocol and began what I can only describe as comfort behaviors lying close to the child, allowing himself to be petted, even bringing the child his favorite toy from the training kit. This was not taught behavior. This was intuitive response to emotional distress. As Diane read deeper into the journals, a picture emerged of a dog with capabilities that bordered on the supernatural. Sarah had documented incidents where Max seemed to anticipate emergencies before they occurred, where he displayed knowledge of terrain and conditions that he couldn't possibly have encountered before, where his behavior suggested an understanding of human psychology that exceeded normal animal intelligence. But it was the final entry, dated just 2 days before Sarah's death, that made Diane's hands tremble as she read. I've been having the strangest dreams about Max lately. In them, he's older, scarred from some kind of adventure I'm not part of. He's leading other dogs, protecting people I don't recognize, working in places I've never seen. The dreams feel more real than my waking life sometimes. I know this sounds crazy, but I think Max is meant for something bigger than our little training program. I think he's meant to help people in ways we can't even imagine yet. If something ever happens to me, Mom needs to trust Max's instincts. He'll know what to do, even if it doesn't make sense to the rest of us. Double quotes. Diane set the journal aside, her heart racing. Sarah had written those words 48 hours before the car accident that claimed her life. 48 hours before she died trying to save a 3-year-old child who had run into traffic. Sarah had given her own life to push that child to safety, dying as she had lived protecting others at any cost. Max raised his head from his position by her feet, as if sensing her emotional turmoil. His brown eyes held that same intelligent expression she remembered from years of working together. But now she saw something else there. A patience, a wisdom that seemed to suggest he understood far more about the connections between past and present than any dog should be able to comprehend. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows of her old farmhouse, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint sound of other golden retrievers calling to each other across the darkness. Max's ears perked up at the sound, and for a moment, Diane could swear she saw him smile. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to arrange themselves, but the picture they formed was too extraordinary to believe. Yet the evidence was mounting. Max's disappearance on the anniversary of Sarah's death, his reappearance at the exact moment when Emily needed rescue, the pack of trained dogs that had materialized from nowhere to assist him. As she prepared for bed, Diane found herself wondering if some bonds between human and animal might indeed transcend the boundaries of life and death. And if so, what did Max's return really mean for both of them? The memory came to Diane in fragments, the way traumatic recollections often do, disconnected images and sensations that her mind had worked for 5 years to suppress. She was sitting at her kitchen table the next morning, watching Max eat his breakfast with the methodical precision she remembered so well when the phone call came. Ms. Hartwell? This is Detective Susan Chun with the State Police. I hope I'm not calling too early, but I wanted to follow up on Emily Henderson's rescue yesterday. There are some questions about the circumstances that I'd like to discuss with you. Diane's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Questions. Nothing concerning your actions, Detective Chen assured her quickly. Your work was exemplary. But the presence of that trained dog pack has raised some flags in our system. were trying to piece together where they came from and why they were in that specific location at that specific time. As Diane arranged to meet with the detective later that afternoon, her mind drifted inevitably back to the night that had changed everything. She had spent 5 years successfully avoiding the details of Sarah's death, accepting only the bare facts necessary to function. Car accident, rainy night, her daughter died saving a child. But Max's return was forcing her to confront memories she had buried beneath layers of guilt and self-protection. The accident had happened on Highway 47, a winding rural road that connected their small town to the regional medical center. Sarah had been driving home from her part-time job at the veterinary clinic, a route she had traveled hundreds of times. It was raining, one of those sudden autumn storms that turn familiar roads treacherous in minutes. According to the police report that Diane had never been able to bring herself to read completely, a 3-year-old boy named Tommy Martinez had somehow gotten out of his family's car at a rest stop. In the confusion of the storm and the darkness, his parents hadn't immediately realized he was missing. Tommy had wandered onto the highway, drawn perhaps by the lights of passing vehicles. Standing directly in the path of an oncoming truck, Sarah had seen him first. Witnesses said she swerved her car off the road and jumped out, running toward the child without regard for her own safety. She reached Tommy in time to push him toward the shoulder, but the truck driver, blinded by rain and the sudden appearance of figures in his headlights, couldn't stop in time. Sarah took the full impact, dying instantly so that a child she had never met could live. It was. The police chaplain had told her the most heroic act he had witnessed in 30 years of dealing with traffic fatalities. Sarah had given her life, without hesitation, to save a stranger's child. The boy survived with only minor scrapes. Sarah's funeral had been attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched through her work with rescue animals. But heroism, Diane had learned, provided cold comfort to those left behind. In the weeks following Sarah's death, Max had become inconsolable. The dog seemed to understand that his beloved trainer was never coming home, and his grief manifested in ways that broke Diane's heart daily. He would sit by the front door for hours, waiting for Sarah's return. He refused to eat his favorite treats. Most heartbreakingly, he would carry Sarah's old training gloves around the house, whimpering softly, as if trying to bring her back through the power of scent memory. Diane had tried to maintain their search and rescue work, thinking that familiar routines might help both of them process their loss. But Max's performance had become erratic, distracted. During training exercises, he would suddenly abandon his search patterns and run toward any young woman with dark hair, hoping against canine logic that one of them might be Sarah. The other handlers began to worry that Max was becoming unreliable, potentially dangerous in real emergency situations. The breaking point had come during a search for a missing hiker 6 months after Sarah's death. Max had located the injured man quickly and efficiently, demonstrating that his tracking abilities remained sharp. But when the rescue team arrived, they found Max curled up beside the victim, not in the alert posture of a working dog, but in the protective position Diane recognized from those nights when Sarah had been sick with flu. He was trying to comfort the injured hiker the way he had once comforted Sarah. "He's grieving," the team veterinarian had explained gently. Dogs form profound emotional attachments, especially working dogs paired with specific handlers. Max doesn't understand why Sarah isn't coming back, and he's trying to fill that void by caring for every person he encounters. Diane had made the hardest decision of her professional life that day. She retired Max from active duty and withdrew from search and rescue work herself. The dog needed time to heal, and honestly, so did she. They spent the next 4 years in quiet seclusion, two grieving souls learning to live with permanent loss. Max had gradually adapted to retirement, though he never fully recovered his former enthusiasm for life. He remained a loyal companion, alert and affectionate, but there was always a sadness in his eyes that reflected Diane's own unhealed wounds. They had been content together in their shared sorrow, two survivors marking time until they could join Sarah in whatever comes after. This life died until 8 months ago, when everything changed again. Diane forced herself to remember that night with the clarity she had avoided for so long. It had been storming, a violent thunderstorm that reminded her inevitably of the night Sarah died. Max had been restless all evening, pacing through the house with an agitation she hadn't seen since the early days of his grief. Around midnight, he had begun whining at the back door, scratching at the wood with increasing desperation. "What is it, boy?" she had asked, peering out into the storm-lashed darkness. Lightning illuminated the yard in stark black and white, but she could see nothing that would account for Max's distress. Max had looked up at her with an expression of profound urgency, then back toward the door. His meaning was unmistakable. He needed to go outside despite the dangerous weather. Against her better judgment, Diane had opened the door. Max had bolted into the storm without a moment's hesitation, disappearing into the darkness as if answering some call she couldn't hear. She had spent the rest of that night searching for him, calling his name into the wind and rain until her voice gave out. In the morning, she found the back gate standing open, not damaged by the storm, but deliberately opened, as if Max had somehow manipulated the latch himself. His muddy paw prints led to the edge of her property and then vanished into the forest. For weeks afterward, Diane had convinced herself that Max would return when he was ready. Dogs sometimes wandered off during storms, disoriented by the electrical activity and unusual atmospheric pressure. She put up missing dog posters, contacted every shelter and veterinary clinic in the region, even hired a pet detective who specialized in finding lost animals. But as weeks stretched into months with no sign of Max, Diane had been forced to accept the most likely explanation. Her aging dog had become confused during the storm and died somewhere in the wilderness, probably taken by coyotes or simply succumbing to exposure. It was a crushing blow that had sent her deeper into the isolation she had maintained since Sarah's death. Now, sitting in her kitchen with Max contentedly finishing his breakfast as if he had never been away, Diane was forced to confront a possibility that challenged everything she thought she understood about life, death, and the bonds that connect living beings across impossible distances. The accident report lay on her kitchen table, retrieved from the filing cabinet where she had kept it, unread for 5 years. Detective Chen had suggested that understanding the full circumstances of Sarah's death might provide context for Max's recent behavior. With trembling hands, Diane opened the folder and began to read the details she had been too grief-stricken to absorb at the time. The report was thorough and clinical, documenting every aspect of the accident with the dispassionate precision of official investigation. But buried in the witness statements was information that made her breath catch in her throat. Subject Sarah Hartwell was observed to exit her vehicle and approach the child victim with what witnesses describe as supernatural speed and precision. Despite poor visibility conditions, she moved directly toward the child's location, as if she possessed knowledge of his exact position. Multiple witnesses commented that her actions seemed guided or instinctive in a way that exceeded normal human reaction time. Another statement from the truck driver who had inadvertently caused the accident. "I never saw the lady until the very last second, but somehow she knew exactly where that little boy was going to be. It was like she could see in the dark. If she hadn't been there, if she hadn't known exactly what to do, that child would be dead. She saved his life with her own." Diane set the report aside, her hands shaking with the weight of revelation. Sarah hadn't just died heroically. She had died with the same inexplicable instinct for locating and protecting endangered people that Max had demonstrated with Emily. The same supernatural awareness that had characterized her daughter's best. Search and rescue work had manifested in her final, Search and rescue work had manifested in her final, fatal act of rescue. Max raised his head from his food bowl and approached Diane with the deliberate pace of a dog who understood the significance of the moment. He sat beside her chair and placed his heavy head on her lap, offering the comfort he had provided countless times during their years of shared grief. But this time, Diane sensed something different in his presence. This wasn't just the comfort of a loyal pet. This was the purposeful attention of a working dog who had completed an important mission and was ready to begin the next phase of his service. "You didn't leave me, did you?" she whispered, stroking his scarred head. "You were called away to do something Sarah needed you to do." Max's tail wagged once, slowly, and Diane could swear she heard an echo of her daughter's laughter in the autumn wind that rattled her kitchen windows. Detective Susan Chun was younger than Diane had expected, perhaps 35 years old, with the alert, analytical demeanor of someone who made her living by assembling truth from fragments of information. They met at a coffee shop in town, neutral territory that allowed for casual conversation without the formal weight of an official interview. "I want to be clear from the start," Detective Chun said, settling into her chair with a steaming mug of coffee, "that you're not under any kind of investigation. Your actions in finding Emily Henderson were exemplary, but the circumstances surrounding that pack of golden retrievers have raised some questions that we need to explore." Diane nodded, wrapping her hands around her own coffee cup for warmth. 2 weeks had passed since Emily's rescue, and the initial euphoria of the successful outcome had given way to a more complex understanding of what had actually occurred in those woods. "What kind of questions?" she asked. "Well, for starters, we've been trying to track the origin of those 5 dogs currently at the county shelter. They're clearly purebred golden retrievers, probably worth several $1,000s each. They've all been spayed or neutered, which suggests responsible ownership. They show signs of extensive professional training. Yet there's no record of them in any database, no microchips, no registration papers, no missing dog reports that match their descriptions." Detective Chun pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages. "We've contacted every major kennel, training facility, and rescue organization within a 200-mile radius. Nobody has reported missing animals matching these descriptions. It's as if they materialized out of thin air." "Maybe they're from farther away," Diane suggested, though even as she spoke, she knew how unlikely that sounded. Dogs didn't typically travel hundreds of miles to form spontaneous rescue packs. "That's possible, but it raises even more questions. How did they know to come to this specific area at this specific time? And why did they display such organized behavior?" The shelter director says they function like a trained unit, not like random strays. Detective Chun leaned forward slightly, her expression growing more serious. "Diane, I've been a cop for 12 years. I've seen a lot of strange things, but I've never encountered anything quite like this. These dogs appeared exactly when and where they were needed most, performed a flawless rescue operation, and then vanished back into the woods. That's not normal animal behavior." Diane found herself thinking about the weather station records. She had requested the previous week official meteorological data covering the past 8 months. What she had discovered there had only deepened the mystery surrounding Max's disappearance and return. "Detective, have you looked into the weather patterns for this region over the past 8 months?" Diane asked. Chun's eyebrows rose with interest. "Weather patterns? What kind of connection are you thinking about?" "Max, the dog that led us to Emily, disappeared during a severe thunderstorm 8 months ago. Since then, I've been tracking reports of unusual animal sightings in this area. What I've found is that they correlate almost perfectly with major weather events." Diane pulled out a folder containing photocopied documents and weather charts. 3 months ago, during that ice storm in February, a farmer named Bill Patterson reported seeing a pack of golden retrievers leading his cattle to shelter before the worst of the weather hit. His words were, "Those dogs saved my herd." Chun examined the documents with growing fascination. Go on. Last month, during the flash, flooding near Millerville, a family trapped by rising water said golden retrievers appeared and led them to higher ground. The dogs stayed with them until the rescue helicopters arrived. Diane pointed to another entry in her notes. 2 weeks before Emily went missing, an elderly woman named Grace Morrison fell and broke her hip while hiking. She was found by searchers because a golden retriever led them directly to her location. You're saying these dogs have been conducting rescue operations throughout the region? I'm saying the evidence suggests that possibility. Diane spread out a topographical map marked with colored pins. Every sighting, every incident follows the same pattern. People in danger during severe weather conditions. Golden retrievers appearing to provide assistance, then disappearing again without explanation. Detective Chun studied the map with the focused attention of someone trained to recognize patterns. This is remarkable work, Diane. Have you shared this information with anyone else? Just the local wildlife officer, Pete Hernandez. He's been getting similar reports, but hadn't connected them until I showed him the timeline. Diane hesitated, then decided to trust the detective with her growing suspicions. There's something else. Something that might sound crazy. After what I've seen this week, I'm prepared to listen to almost anything. The night Max disappeared was the 5th anniversary of my daughter's death. Sarah was killed in a car accident while saving a 3-year-old boy. She was also a search and rescue trainer, Max's primary handler before she died. Chun's expression grew thoughtful. You think there's a connection between your daughter's death and Max's behavior? I think Max disappeared that night because he was called to fulfill some kind of mission that Sarah couldn't complete herself. Diane knew how it sounded, but the words felt true as she spoke them. I think he's been spending these 8 months doing exactly what Sarah trained him to do, finding people who need help and making sure they survive. The detective was quiet for several minutes, making notes and studying the map. Finally, she looked up with an expression that mixed professional skepticism with genuine curiosity. Diane, what you're describing would require a level of coordination and intelligence that exceeds normal animal behavior. Even the most highly trained search and rescue dogs work under human direction. They don't organize autonomous rescue operations. I know how it sounds, Diane admitted. But the evidence is all there. And there's more. She opened another folder, this one containing copies of Sarah's training journals. My daughter documented Max's development from puppyhood. Even then, she noted behaviors that were ... unusual. He seemed to anticipate emergencies before they occurred. He could locate people in distress from distances that exceeded his physical sensory capabilities. Sarah believed he had abilities that went beyond normal canine intelligence. Detective Chun accepted the journals and began reading Sarah's careful notations. As she progressed through the entries, her expression grew increasingly thoughtful. This is fascinating material, she said finally. Your daughter was clearly a talented trainer and a careful observer. But what you're suggesting that Max has been operating independently for 8 months, leading rescue missions with a pack of other dogs that would require cognitive abilities we don't typically associate with animals. Unless, Diane said quietly, those abilities aren't limited to animals. The implication hung in the air between them. Detective Chun closed the journal and leaned back in her chair, clearly processing information that challenged her understanding of how the world worked. Let me ask you something, Chun said. If your theory is correct, if Max has been conducting these rescue operations under some kind of guidance from your daughter, why did he come back to you now? Why reveal himself during Emily's rescue instead of continuing his covert operations? It was a question Diane had been asking herself constantly since Max's return. "I think," she said slowly, "that phase of his mission is complete. I think he's ready to begin the next phase. Which would be? I don't know yet. But I have a feeling. It involves me returning to search and rescue work." Detective Chun finished her coffee and gathered her notes. "Diane, I'm going to be honest with you. Nothing about this case fits normal parameters. But the evidence you've compiled is compelling, and the results speak for themselves. Emily Henderson is alive because of what happened in those woods." She stood up, extending her hand to Diane. "I'm going to recommend that the investigation into the origin of those dogs be continued, but with a focus on documenting their positive impact rather than treating them as a mystery to be solved. Sometimes the most important questions don't have answers that fit into official reports." As Detective Chun left the coffee shop, Diane remained at the table, staring at the map with its colored pins marking locations where miracles had occurred. 8 months of secret rescues, conducted by a pack of golden retrievers, led by a dog who had once been her faithful partner. It was impossible to believe, except for the undeniable fact that it had happened. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Emily's mother. "Emily keeps asking when she can see Max again. She says she has something important to tell him. Would it be possible for us to visit sometime soon?" Diane smiled, typing back her response. "Of course. I think Max would like that very much." Outside the coffee shop window, autumn leaves danced in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint sound of dogs calling to each other across the fields. Max was waiting for her at home, patient as always, ready for whatever came next in their shared journey of service and healing. The investigation into the mysterious rescue pack would continue, but Diane knew that some truths transcended official documentation. Love, loyalty, and the bonds that connect souls across the boundaries of life and death. These were realities that no amount of evidence could fully explain, and no lack of evidence could diminish. Max had returned to her for a reason. Now she needed to discover what that reason was and find the courage to embrace whatever purpose awaited them both. The Henderson family arrived on a crisp Saturday morning when the autumn light had that particular quality that makes everything seem touched with gold. Emily bounced out of their car before her parents could even turn off the engine, her face bright with anticipation. She had been talking about this visit for days, according to her mother's phone calls, insisting that she had something important to discuss with Max. Diane watched from her front porch as the reuniting unfolded in her yard. Max, who had been resting in a patch of sunlight, rose to his feet the moment he saw Emily. His tail began wagging with an enthusiasm Diane hadn't seen since before Sarah's death, and he approached the child with the careful dignity of a professional greeting a respected colleague. "Hello, Max," Emily said formally, kneeling down to his level. "I've been thinking about you every day since the woods. I wanted to thank you properly." Max sat in front of her and offered his paw, just as he had been trained to do. But then he did something that made Diane's breath catch. He bowed his head slightly, as if acknowledging Emily's gratitude with the solemnity it deserved. "Emily insisted we bring these," Lisa Henderson said, approaching Diane with a large bag. "She's been baking dog treats all week. She says Max deserves the best one she could make." Michael Henderson looked more relaxed than he had in the hospital, though Diane could still see the shadow of recent trauma in his eyes. "She's been different since the rescue," he explained quietly. "More confident, more purposeful. It's like the experience changed something fundamental about how she sees herself." They spent the morning in Diane's backyard, Emily playing with Max while the adults watched from the porch. But it wasn't the typical play between child and dog. Emily seemed to be testing Max's responses, presenting him with small challenges and problems to solve. She would hide treats around the yard and then give him subtle hand signals, directing his search patterns with the instinctive understanding of someone who'd been born to work with animals. Has she shown this kind of interest in dogs before? Diane asked. Never, Lisa replied, her voice filled with wonder. Emily's always been more interested in books and art. But since the rescue, she talks constantly about animal behavior, search and rescue techniques, how dogs communicate with humans. She's checked out every book about working dogs from the library. Around noon, Emily approached the adults with Max walking beside her in perfect heel position. "Ms. Hartwell," she said with the seriousness that children reserve for their most important announcements. "I need to tell you something about the other dogs." Diane felt her pulse quicken. "What about them?" "They're not ordinary strays. They're trained just like Max, aren't they?" Emily's eyes were bright with intelligence, beyond her years. "When I was lost, they worked together like a team. Each one had a specific job. The smaller female stayed close to keep me warm. The two larger males took turns patrolling the area. Another one went for water and brought it back somehow. They were organized." Michael and Lisa exchanged glances. This was clearly not the first time Emily had shared these observations. "What else did you notice?" Diane asked, genuinely curious about Emily's perspective on events that had puzzled experienced investigators. Max was definitely in charge, but he wasn't just giving orders. It was more like he was coordinating them, helping them remember what they were trained to do. Emily sat down on the porch steps, Max immediately positioning himself beside her. And there was something else. "When I was really scared, during the darkest part of the night, Max did something strange." "What kind of strange?" "He started making sounds that weren't exactly barking or whining. More like he was talking, but in dog language. And the other dogs responded like they understood exactly what he was saying. Then they all moved closer to me, arranged themselves in a tighter circle. It felt like Max was telling them that I needed extra protection." Diane felt a chill run down her spine. Sarah had written in her journals about Max's unusual vocalizations, particularly during high-stress training scenarios. She had described them as complex communications that seemed to convey far more information than typical dog sounds. "Emily," Diane said carefully, "did it seem like Max recognized you somehow? Like he knew who you were before you met?" The child considered this question with the gravity it deserved. "Yes," she said finally. "From the very first moment, he looked at me like he'd been expecting me. Like he knew I was the person he was supposed to find." That afternoon, while Emily's parents explored the small town, Diane took Emily to visit the county animal shelter. Carol Martinez, the shelter director, had become increasingly intrigued by the golden retriever pack and welcomed the opportunity to observe them with someone who had experienced their rescue capabilities firsthand. The 5 dogs were housed together in the shelter's largest outdoor run, a spacious area with both sun and shade. As Emily approached the fence, all 5 dogs rose and arranged themselves in a semicircle, their attention focused entirely on her. Their posture was alert but relaxed, the stance of professionals recognizing a colleague. "They remember me," Emily said with quiet satisfaction. "Look at how they're positioned. It's the same formation they used in the woods." Carol unlocked the gate and allowed Emily to enter the enclosure. Diane watched with fascination as the child interacted with each dog individually, somehow knowing instinctively how to approach each animal based on their unique personalities and roles within the pack structure. The veterinarian who examined them was amazed by their condition, Carol explained to Diane. "Despite living wild for months, they're all in excellent health. Their teeth are clean, their coats are pristine, their muscle tone suggests regular exercise and proper nutrition. They've been taking care of themselves with remarkable efficiency. Any signs of illness or injury? Minor scarring on a few of them, consistent with outdoor living, but nothing serious. And here's the interesting part. Their behavior suggests they've been working regularly. Their paws show the kind of wear patterns you'd expect from dogs, doing search and rescue work on varied terrain. Emily had sat down in the center of the enclosure, and the 5 dogs had arranged themselves around her in the same protective formation Max had described from the woods. But now Diane could observe the subtle details Emily had mentioned. Each dog maintained a specific distance and position, creating overlapping fields of observation that would allow them to monitor threats from any direction. It was sophisticated, pack behavior that exceeded what most people would expect from domestic animals. "Ms. Martinez," Emily said, looking up from her position among the dogs. "These dogs don't want to be adopted separately. They need to stay together." Carol's expression grew concerned. "I understand that, Emily, but finding a home for 5 large dogs is extremely difficult. Most people can't handle that kind of responsibility. What if they went to someone who knew how to work with them?" Emily asked. "Someone who understood that they're not just pets, but working dogs with important jobs to do?" The implication was clear, and Diane felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a familiar coat. These dogs had been part of Max's mission during his 8 months in the wilderness. Now that mission was complete, but they remained his pack, his responsibility. And Max was her responsibility. On the drive back to Diane's house, Emily was unusually quiet. Finally, as they pulled into the driveway, she spoke. "Ms. Hartwell, I think Max came back to you because it's time for you to return to rescue work. But not the way you did it before. This time, you'll have a whole team." "What makes you say that?" "Because that's what heroes do," Emily said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "They don't work alone when they can work together. And Max is definitely a hero, which means you must be one too." That evening, after the Henderson family had returned to their hotel, Diane sat on her back porch with Max at her feet. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and the distant sound of the other golden retrievers calling across the darkening fields. Tomorrow she would need to make a decision about adopting the pack. Tomorrow she would need to decide whether she was ready to return to a life of service and purpose. But tonight, she simply sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the sound of Max's steady breathing and feeling for the first time in 5 years that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Diane had been avoiding Sarah's bedroom for 5 years, maintaining it exactly as her daughter had left it on the morning of the accident. But Max's return had stirred something deep within her. Need to finally confront the memories she had been too wounded to face. The room smelled faintly of Sarah's favorite lavender soap and the cedar sachets she had kept in her dresser drawers to ward off moths. Sarah's desk sat beneath the window where she had loved to write, surrounded by veterinary textbooks, training manuals, and notebooks filled with her careful observations about animal behavior. Diane had cleaned this room countless times over the years, dusting around her daughter's possessions like a curator maintaining a shrine. But she had never truly examined the personal items Sarah had left behind that today felt different. Max had followed her upstairs and now lay in the doorway, watching with patient attention as Diane began the process of finally truly saying goodbye to her daughter by understanding who Sarah had been in her final days. The desk drawers yielded, the expected treasures of a young woman preparing for a career in veterinary medicine, textbooks marked with careful annotations, research papers about canine psychology, photographs of the animals she had trained and loved. But it was the bottom drawer that stopped Diane's breath. Hidden beneath a stack of professional journals was a sealed envelope marked with her own name in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. Diane's hands trembled as she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. It was dated 2 days before the accident, written in the same precise script Sarah had used for her training journals. "Mom," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and I need you to understand some things that I've never been able." to explain while I was alive. I've been having dreams lately. Not ordinary dreams, but visions that feel more real than my waking life. In them, I see Max leading other dogs through forests and fields, finding people who are lost or in danger. He's older in these dreams, scarred from adventures I'm not part of, but he's fulfilling a purpose that's bigger than anything we've trained him for here. I know this sounds crazy, Mom, but I think some animals are chosen for special purposes. Max isn't just an exceptionally smart dog. He's a bridge between our world and something larger, something that connects all living beings through love and service. The dreams show me that he's meant to save people in ways we can't even imagine. There's something else. In the clearest of these dreams, I see myself making a choice to save a child's life, knowing that it will cost me my own. I'm not afraid of this, Mom. If it happens, please know that I'm choosing to follow the same calling that drives Max, the need to protect others, especially children, even when the cost is everything. If I don't survive to continue training, Max, I need you to trust his instincts completely. He'll know what to do, even if it doesn't make sense to the rest of us. Let him go when he needs to go. Trust him when he returns. And most importantly, don't let my death be the end of your own purpose. Max will need you to help him fulfill his mission. I love you more than words can express. If something happens to me, remember that love doesn't end with death. It transforms into something even more powerful. Max understands this in ways we're only beginning to discover. Trust him, Mom. Trust yourself. And know that whatever happens, we're all part of something beautiful and important. All my love, Essa, RHPS. Check the secret compartment in my desk. There's something there you need to see. Diane set the letter aside with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. Sarah had known. Somehow, impossibly, her daughter had foreseen her own death and Max's future mission. The dream Sarah described matched perfectly with what had actually occurred: Max's disappearance, his 8 months in the wilderness leading rescue operations, his return when Emily needed saving. The secret compartment was hidden behind a small panel in the desk's back corner, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, Diane found a manila folder containing photocopies of official documents she had never seen before. The first was the complete police report from Sarah's accident, including witness statements that had been too painful for Diane to read at the time. But these weren't the sanitized summaries she had been given 5 years ago. These were the full, unedited accounts of what witnesses had observed on that rainy night. The young woman moved like she could see in the dark. She knew exactly where that little boy was going to be before he got there. It was like she was being guided by something the rest of us couldn't see. I've never seen anything like it. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around trying to figure out what was happening. She went straight to that child like she'd been expecting him to be there. The strangest part was right before the truck hit her. She looked back toward our car, and I swear she smiled, like she was at peace with what was about to happen. The folder also contained medical records from the 3-year-old boy Sarah had saved, Tommy Martinez, the child who had wandered onto the highway. But these weren't just treatment records. They were follow-up reports documenting Tommy's remarkable recovery and development in the years following the accident. Tommy, it seemed, had displayed unusual abilities since the night Sarah saved his life. He showed an uncanny talent for finding lost objects and missing pets. He could sense when other children were in distress, even at a distance. Most remarkably, he had developed an extraordinary bond with animals, particularly dogs, who seemed to recognize him as someone special. At the bottom of the folder was a photograph that made Diane's heart stop. It showed Tommy Martinez, now 8 years old, standing in a backyard with a golden retriever. The dog was clearly Max, though the photo had been taken just 3 months ago, during the period when Max was supposedly lost in the wilderness. On the back of the photograph, Someone had written in careful handwriting, "Tommy and his guardian angel." This dog appeared during a thunderstorm and has been protecting our family ever since. We call him Hero. Diane sank into Sarah's desk chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was discovering. Max hadn't just been conducting random rescue operations during his 8 months away. He had been specifically protecting Tommy Martinez, the child Sarah had died to save. The mission Sarah had foreseen in her dreams had been quite literal. Max was to continue her work of protecting the innocent, starting with the boy whose life had cost Sarah her own. Max appeared in the doorway, as if sensing that Diane had reached the crucial moment of understanding. He approached slowly and laid his massive head on her lap, his brown eyes filled with the patient wisdom of a dog who had carried profound secrets for far too long. "You were never lost, were you?" Diane whispered, stroking his scarred head. "You were exactly where Sarah needed you to be." Max's tail wagged once, slowly, and Diane felt the presence of her daughter as strongly as if Sarah had just walked into the room. The love that had connected them in life hadn't been severed by death. It had been transformed into something that could work through Max to continue protecting children who needed saving. But Tommy Martinez was only the beginning. Emily Henderson's rescue had marked the end of one phase of Max's mission and the beginning of another. Sarah's letter had been clear about what came next. Diane needed to trust Max's instincts and resume her own calling in search and rescue work. The pack of golden retrievers at the county shelter weren't random strays. They were Max's recruits. Dogs he had somehow gathered and trained during his months in the wilderness. They were ready to work, ready to serve, ready to form the foundation of a search and rescue operation unlike anything that had existed before dawn as the afternoon light slanted through Sarah's bedroom windows. Diane made a decision that felt like the first truly right choice she had made in 5 years. Tomorrow she would go to the animal shelter and adopt all 5 dogs. She would begin the process of reactivating her search and rescue certification. She would trust in the mission that Sarah had foreseen and Max had been faithfully executing. Most importantly, she would stop running from the purpose that had defined her life before grief had made her forget who she was meant to be. Sarah's death hadn't been a tragedy that ended everything. It had been a transformation that made new kinds of miracles possible. Max lifted his head from her lap and walked to the window, looking out toward the fields where his pack waited. In the distance, Diane could hear the other golden retrievers calling to each other across the darkening landscape, not the random barking of stray dogs, but the organized communication of a working team maintaining contact. Diane joined Max at the window, placing her hand on his broad back as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. For the first time since Sarah's death, she felt the stirring of genuine excitement about the future. There was work to be done, people to save, a legacy to honor. "Tomorrow we begin again," she said quietly. "All of us together." Max pressed against her side, and in that moment, Diane could swear she felt Sarah's presence surrounding them both, not as a ghost or memory, but as a living force that had found new ways to express love and protection through the bonds that connected all beings willing to serve something greater than themselves. The letter had been Sarah's final gift to her mother. The truth that death was not an ending but a transformation, that love could work through any willing heart, and that the mission of protecting the innocent was too important to be limited by the boundaries between life and death. Outside, the golden retrievers continued their distant conversation, and Diane understood now that they were not just animals, but instruments of grace, gathered by Max to serve the same purpose that had driven Sarah to sacrifice her life for a stranger's child. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rescues, new opportunities to prove that love truly was stronger than death. But tonight, surrounded by Sarah's belongings and accompanied by Max's steady presence, Diane felt something she had thought was lost forever, hope for the future and peace with the past, united in the understanding that every ending was also a beginning, and every loss contained the seeds of unexpected miracles. The paperwork required to adopt 5 adult golden retrievers was more complex than Diane had anticipated, but Carol Martinez proved to be an invaluable ally in navigating the bureaucratic maze. 3 days after discovering Sarah's letter, Diane stood in the county animal shelter signing adoption forms while Max supervised the introduction of his pack to their new permanent home. "I have to admit," Carol said, watching the dogs interact with calm precision, "I've never seen anything quite like their group dynamics. It's almost like they've been waiting for you specifically." Emily Henderson had insisted on being present for the adoption, convincing her parents to drive down for what she called a very important day. She sat cross-legged on the floor of the shelter's meeting room, surrounded by 6 golden retrievers who had arranged themselves in their characteristic protective formation around her. "What are you going to name them?" Emily asked, scratching behind the ears of the smallest female, who had claimed a position directly beside her. Diane had been thinking about names during the sleepless nights since reading Sarah's letter. These weren't ordinary pets requiring cute or clever monikers. They were working dogs who would soon be saving lives. Their names needed to reflect their purpose and honor their capabilities. "This is Grace," she said, indicating the female beside Emily. "She was the one who stayed closest to you in the woods, providing comfort and warmth. That's the kind of grace that gets people through their darkest moments." Emily nodded approvingly. "What about the others?" Diane moved among the dogs, introducing each one as if she had known them for years rather than days. "The large male with the white patch on his chest is Scout. He's the one who located the water source and scouted the perimeter for threats. The red-gold female is Hope, because she maintained watch during the deepest part of the night when hope is hardest to hold on to." She continued around the circle. "Courage," indicating a sturdy male with intelligent eyes, because he took point, positioned during the most dangerous hours. And finally, Faith, gesturing toward the last dog, a smaller male with graying around his muzzle, because he stayed calm and steady when the others might have panicked. "Max, Grace, Scout, Hope, Courage, and Faith," Emily repeated, committing the names to memory. "They sound like a superhero team." "In a way, they are," Diane replied, signing the final adoption form. The transition to Diane's property went smoothly, as if the dogs had been planning this move for months. They explored the house and yard with professional thoroughness, assessing entry points, establishing patrol routes, and identifying the optimal locations for food, water, and rest areas. Within hours, they had integrated themselves into the property's routines with minimal disruption. But the real work began the following week, when Diane contacted Captain Rodriguez about reactivating her search and rescue certification. The process would normally take months, but Rodriguez had been following the developments surrounding Emily's rescue with keen professional interest. "Diane, I'm not going to pretend this is a normal situation," Rodriguez said during their meeting at the state police headquarters. A 66-year-old handler returning to active duty with a pack of 6 untrained dogs would typically be something we'd discourage. But given what we witnessed during the Henderson rescue, I'm inclined to fast-track your recertification. The testing process was rigorous and comprehensive. Diane had to demonstrate that her own skills remained sharp despite 5 years of inactivity, while simultaneously proving that the Golden Retriever Pack could function as a coordinated search and rescue unit. The evaluation took place over 3 days of intensive field exercises designed to simulate real emergency conditions. Emily Henderson had somehow convinced her parents to let her participate as a training volunteer, serving as a mock victim for the dogs to locate during practice scenarios. Watching her work with the pack, Diane was struck by the child's natural understanding of their capabilities and communication patterns. "She's remarkable," commented Dr. Sarah Chung, the animal behaviorist brought in to evaluate the pack's fitness for certification. "I've never seen a child display such intuitive understanding of complex pack dynamics. It's almost like she's communicating with them on a level that exceeds normal human-animal interaction." The dog's performance exceeded even Diane's optimistic expectations. They demonstrated advanced search patterns, coordinated sweep techniques, and the ability to locate victims in challenging terrain with remarkable efficiency. Most impressively, they showed the kind of independent judgment that allowed them to adapt their strategies based on changing conditions without requiring constant human direction. But it was Max who truly astonished the evaluators. During the final test scenario, he located a mock victim, Emily, hidden in a dense thicket half a mile from the starting point. In less than 20 minutes, a time that would have been impressive for a search helicopter, let alone a dog working ground. Scent patterns. How does he do that? Dr. Chun asked, reviewing the video footage of Max's search pattern. He moves through the terrain like he has prior knowledge of the victim's location. He reads the situation at a level that goes beyond normal sensory input, Diane explained, though she knew her answer sounded inadequate. Max has always had abilities that exceeded standard parameters. The certification process culminated with a practical exercise designed to test the unit's readiness for real emergency deployment. A volunteer was hidden somewhere within a 500-acre wilderness area, and Diane's team had 4 hours to locate and signal the person's position. It was the kind of challenge that would normally require multiple search teams working in coordination. Max led the pack into the wilderness with the focused intensity of a commander deploying troops. The other dogs spread out in a coordinated pattern that covered maximum ground while maintaining communication through a complex system of vocalizations that sounded more like language than typical dog sounds. Diane followed the pack's movement with growing amazement. They were functioning as a true unit, sharing information and adjusting their search patterns based on collective intelligence rather than individual instinct. When Scout located fresh scent traces, he immediately communicated the information to the others. When Hope identified a promising direction, the entire pack shifted their focus accordingly. 3 hours and 17 minutes after beginning the search, Max alerted to a location in a rocky ravine where the volunteer was waiting with a sprained ankle, a genuine injury that had occurred during the hiding process. The pack had not only found their target within the allotted time, they had adapted to provide genuine assistance for an actual emergency. "Congratulations," Captain Rodriguez said as the evaluation team reviewed their findings. "I'm prepared to grant full certification for your search and rescue unit. But I have to ask, how did you train them to work at this level in just 2 weeks?" Diane looked at Max, who was resting in the shade after their successful exercise, surrounded by his pack members in their characteristic protective formation. "I didn't train them," she said honestly. "They came to me already knowing what they needed to know." That evening, as Diane filled out the final paperwork that would officially recognize her team as a certified search and rescue unit, Emily Henderson called with excitement in her voice. "Ms. Hartwell, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of all of you. Max and the others are going to save so many people, and you're going to be helping them do exactly what they were meant to do." After hanging up, Diane sat on her back porch, watching the golden retrievers patrol the perimeter of her property with professional vigilance. Tomorrow, their names would be entered into the State Emergency Response Database. Tomorrow, they would be officially available for deployment to search and rescue operations throughout the region. But tonight, she simply enjoyed the profound satisfaction of knowing that Sarah's mission was continuing through new hands, new hearts, and the unwavering dedication of 6 golden retrievers who understood that some purposes transcend the boundaries between species, between life and death, between the possible and the miraculous. The pack was ready. Diane was ready. And somewhere in the distance, She could swear she heard the sound of her daughter's laughter carried on the autumn wind, celebrating the beginning of a new chapter in the ongoing story of love, service, and the miraculous ways that purpose can survive even the ultimate sacrifice. The emergency radio crackled to life at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late October, pulling Diane from deep sleep with the harsh urgency that every search and rescue professional recognizes. She had been certified for exactly 3 months, but this was the call she had been both anticipating and dreading, the first real test of her new unit's capabilities. All available SAR units, we have a missing child situation in Pinewood State Park. 7-year-old male, separated from family during severe weather conditions. Visibility near zero, temperature dropping rapidly. Immediate response requested. Diane was out of bed and pulling on her gear before the dispatcher finished speaking. Outside, an unexpected autumn storm was lashing the region with wind and freezing rain that made the October night feel more like the depths of winter. The 6 golden retrievers had already assembled in the mudroom, alert and ready, their professional demeanor indicating they understood the gravity of the situation. "This is it," Diane told them as she loaded her emergency equipment. "Everything we've trained for comes down to the next few hours." Max pressed against her side, offering the steady comfort that had sustained her through countless challenging moments over the years. But this time, Diane could sense something different in his demeanor, an intensity that exceeded even his usual focused professionalism. It was as if he understood that this rescue would determine not just their effectiveness as a team, but their worthiness to continue the mission Sarah had envisioned. The drive to Pinewood State Park took 45 minutes through treacherous conditions that would have tested even experienced drivers. Diane's hands were steady on the wheel, but her mind raced through contingency plans and emergency protocols. A missing child in these weather conditions was every parent's worst nightmare and every search and rescue professional's greatest challenge. Captain Rodriguez met her at the emergency command post that had been hastily established in the park's visitor center. The captain's face was grim as she briefed Diane on the situation. 7-year-old Marcus Williams. Family was camping in Site 23 when the storm hit unexpectedly around 2 a.m. Parents woke up to find their tent partially collapsed and Marcus missing. No response to calls, no footprints visible due to the rain. "We've got 2 other SAR teams en route, but they're at least an hour away due to road conditions." Diane studied the topographical map spread across the command table, noting the terrain, features, and potential hazards. Pinewood State Park covered 15,000 acres of mixed forest, rocky ravines, and a network of streams that would be running high and dangerous in these conditions. Any idea which direction he might have gone? Parents think he may have been trying to reach the restroom facilities about 200 yards north of their campsite. But that's just speculation. A scared 7-year-old in a storm could go anywhere. Diane nodded, making mental calculations about search patterns and time constraints. In these conditions, a child could develop hypothermia within hours. Every minute of delay increased the danger exponentially. "We'll start from the campsite and work outward in expanding circles," she decided. "My dogs are trained for coordinated search patterns that should give us maximum coverage in minimum time." As she prepared to deploy her team, Michael Henderson appeared at the command post. Emily's father looked haggard and worried, still processing his own family's recent trauma. "Diane, I heard the radio call. When I realized it was a missing child situation, I had to come help. I know what those parents are going through right now." "Michael, I appreciate the support, but this is going to be dangerous work in terrible conditions. I understand. But I also understand what it means to almost lose your child in the wilderness. If there's anything I can do to help find this boy, I need to do it." Captain Rodriguez intervened. "Actually, we could use additional ground support. Michael, if you're willing to serve as a civilian volunteer, We can equip you with radio gear and assign you to coordinate with base camp. The search began at 5:15 a.m. in conditions that challenged even Diane's decades of experience. The storm had intensified, creating a world of horizontal rain, violent wind gusts, and visibility that rarely extended beyond 20 feet. The golden retrievers moved with professional determination, their training overriding the natural canine instinct to seek shelter during severe weather. Max took point position, leading the pack in a systematic sweep pattern that began at Marcus Williams' campsite and spiraled outward in carefully calculated arcs. The other dogs maintained formation despite the challenging conditions, their golden coats quickly becoming dark with rain and mud as they worked through dense underbrush and treacherous terrain. Diane followed the pack's movement, coordinating their search pattern while monitoring radio communications with the command post. The storm was making electronic equipment unreliable, and she knew they were essentially operating independently once they moved beyond the immediate vicinity of base camp. 2 hours into the search, with dawn providing only marginal improvement. In visibility, Scout alerted to something near a rocky outcropping about half a mile from the original campsite. The pack converged on his position with the coordinated precision of a military unit, their behavior indicating they had located promising scent traces. "Base camp, this is Hartwell Unit," Diane radioed. "We have a possible lead near grid reference Charlie 7. Dogs are showing strong interest in this area." Rodriguez's voice crackled through the static. "Copy that, Hartwell. Are you able to determine direction of travel?" Max was already moving, following a scent trail that led away from the rocky area toward a steep ravine that disappeared into the storm-shrouded darkness. The other dogs flanked him in protective formation, their posture indicating they were tracking fresh sign in dangerous terrain. "Trail leads southeast toward Barker's Ravine," Diane reported. "We're going to need rope gear if this continues into the gorge area." "Negative, Hartwell. Barker's Ravine is too dangerous in these conditions. We need to wait for additional support before." The radio transmission dissolved into static as Diane descended into the ravine system, following her, packed deeper into terrain that would challenge experienced climbers under ideal conditions. But these weren't ideal conditions, and somewhere in this wilderness, a 7-year-old boy was running out of time. Max paused at the edge of a particularly steep section, looking back at Diane with an expression that clearly communicated the choice before them: follow the trail into increasing danger, or abandon the search until conditions improved. It was the kind of decision that defined the difference between competent professionals and true heroes. Diane checked her safety equipment and adjusted her headlamp. "Lead the way, Max. We finish what we start." The descent into Barker's Ravine tested every skill Diane had developed during her decades of search and rescue work. The storm had turned the normally manageable trail into a treacherous obstacle course of loose rocks, slippery surfaces, and rushing water that threatened to sweep away anyone who lost their footing. But the golden retrievers moved through the hazardous terrain with supernatural confidence, as if they possessed knowledge of safe routes that exceeded what normal senses could provide. Max led them along narrow ledges and between boulder fields, with the assurance of an animal following a map only he could see. Diane's radio had lost contact with base camp entirely by the time they reached the bottom of the ravine. They were now operating in complete independence, following a scent trail through conditions that would have forced most search teams to retreat and wait for better weather. It was Faith, the smallest member of the pack, who made the crucial discovery. She had moved ahead of the main group, investigating a cluster of large boulders that formed a natural shelter against the worst of the storm. Her alert bark, sharp, urgent, distinctly different from her normal vocalizations, brought the entire team converging on her position. Hidden in the space between two massive rocks, barely visible in the gray dawn light, was Marcus Williams. The 7-year-old boy was unconscious. His small body curled into the fetal position that represented his final attempt to conserve body heat. His lips were blue with hypothermia, and his breathing was so shallow that Diane initially feared. They'd arrived too late, but he was alive. Barely, critically, but alive. And now the real challenge began, getting him out of Barker's ravine and to medical care before his condition deteriorated beyond the point of recovery. Marcus Williams was barely breathing when Diane reached him, his small body frighteningly cold and still beneath the inadequate protection of his soaked pajamas. She immediately began emergency warming procedures, wrapping him in the thermal blankets from her pack while assessing his condition with the clinical efficiency that had made her legendary in search and rescue circles decades earlier. Severe hypothermia, possible dehydration, unconscious but responsive to tactile stimulation, she reported into her radio, hoping against hope that some signal might penetrate the storm and reach the command post. Only static answered her. The golden retrievers had arranged themselves in a protective semicircle around the rescue site, with Max positioning himself directly beside Marcus to provide additional body heat. It was exactly the same behavior Emily had described from her night in the woods, the pack working as a coordinated unit to preserve life until professional help could arrive. But this time, professional help was cut off by the storm and the treacherous terrain of Barker's ravine. Diane was the only medical assistance Marcus would receive until they could somehow extract him from this natural trap that had become both his salvation and his potential grave. The boy stirred slightly as Diane's warming efforts began to take effect, his eyelids fluttering open to reveal pupils that were still responsive despite his critical condition. It was the first encouraging sign she had seen, and it gave her hope that he might survive the extraction process. "Marcus?" she said softly, her voice cutting through the storm's constant roar. "My name is Diane. I'm here to take you home to your parents. Can you hear me?" The child's lips moved, but no sound emerged. His eyes focused on her face with the desperate relief of someone who had given up hope of rescue. Then his gaze shifted to Max, who was pressed against his side, providing warmth and comfort with the same gentle precision Emily had described. "The dogs found you," Diane explained, checking Marcus's pulse and respiration. "They're going to help us get you out of here safely." The challenge of extraction from Barker's ravine would have been daunting under ideal conditions. In the midst of a violent storm, with an unconscious child and no communication with base camp, it bordered on impossible. The trail they had followed down into the ravine was now impassable due to running water and unstable rock formations. But as Diane studied their surroundings, looking for alternative routes to higher ground, she noticed something remarkable about the golden retrievers' behavior. They weren't simply maintaining defensive positions around the rescue site. They were actively scouting potential escape routes, working as a coordinated reconnaissance team to identify safe passage through terrain that would challenge experienced climbers. Scout had discovered a series of natural ledges that might provide access to the eastern rim of the ravine. Hope was investigating a narrow gap between boulders that could serve as protection from the worst of the wind and rain. Courage had positioned himself at the base of a steep but potentially climbable rock face that offered the most direct route to safety. It was as if they understood the technical requirements of the extraction and were providing professional consultation. Based on their own assessment of the situation, Diane had worked with search and rescue dogs for most of her adult life, but she had never witnessed anything approaching this level of tactical intelligence from animals. Max returned from his own reconnaissance mission and approached Diane with purposeful intent. He sat beside her and offered his paw, the signal they had used for decades to indicate successful completion of a mission phase. But this time, his gesture seemed to communicate something more complex, a request for trust in a plan that exceeded normal human-canine coordination. "What are you thinking, Max?" Diane asked, Studying his intelligent brown eyes for clues to his intentions, Max stood and walked toward the gap Hope had identified, looking back to ensure Diane was following. The space between the massive boulders was narrow but stable, providing natural windbreak that would protect Marcus during the first phase of their ascent. More importantly, it connected to the ledge system Scout had discovered, creating a potential route to safety that none of them could have identified working alone. Diane looked at Marcus, still unconscious but breathing more regularly thanks to the warming treatment and the body heat Max had provided. Moving him in his current condition was risky, but leaving him in the ravine until the storm passed was almost certainly fatal. The choice was between definite action with uncertain outcomes and certain death through inaction. "We're going to try something that's never been done before," she told the unconscious boy as she prepared the improvised stretcher that would carry him to safety. But these dogs have never failed a rescue mission yet. The ascent began with Diane carrying Marcus in a specialized rescue harness while Max led the way through the boulder field toward the protected gap. The other dogs positioned themselves at strategic points along the route, serving as both guides and safety anchors in case someone lost their footing on the treacherous surfaces. The storm seemed to intensify as they climbed higher, as if nature itself was testing their determination to save this child's life. Rain lashed them with increasing fury. Wind threatened to tear them from their precarious handholds, and visibility dropped to mere inches as they navigated through passages that would be challenging for experienced cavers under ideal conditions. But the golden retrievers moved with supernatural confidence through terrain that should have been impossible for domestic animals to navigate. They found secure footing on surfaces that appeared completely unstable, identified handholds that Diane's trained eye had missed completely, and maintained perfect coordination despite the chaos of the storm. When they reached the ledge system Scout had discovered, Diane realized they were following a route that no human search team would have attempted. The ledges were narrow, exposed to the full force of the storm, and connected by gaps that required precise timing and absolute confidence to cross safely. Yet the dogs traversed these obstacles as if they were following a well-marked trail. Max would position himself at the most dangerous crossing points, providing both navigation guidance and physical support when Diane needed to shift Marcus's weight or adjust her grip. The other dogs created a safety network that ensured no one could fall more than a few feet without being caught or redirected to more secure footing. 3 hours after beginning the extraction, they reached the eastern rim of Barker's Ravine. Diane collapsed temporarily on solid ground, exhausted by the physical demands of carrying Marcus through terrain that had tested every skill she had developed during decades of professional rescue work. But Marcus was breathing more steadily now, his color improving as the warming treatment continued to counteract the effects of hypothermia. More importantly, they were now within range of potential radio contact with the command post. "Base camp, this is Hartwell Unit," Diane called into her radio, hoping desperately for human voices after hours of isolation in the storm. Captain Rodriguez's response was immediate and filled with relief. "Hartwell, we've been trying to reach you for 3 hours. What's your status?" "We have Marcus Williams. He's alive but requires immediate medical evacuation. We're on the eastern rim of Barker's Ravine, approximately 2 miles southeast of his original campsite." "Outstanding work, Diane. We have medical personnel standing by, and the storm is beginning to clear. Can you maintain your position until we reach you?" Diane looked at Marcus, who was now conscious and trying to speak, surrounded by 6 golden retrievers who had risked their lives to save his. "We'll be here," she replied. "All of us." As the rescue helicopters appeared through the breaking clouds, Diane realized that this had been more than just a successful search and rescue operation. It had been the ultimate validation of everything Sarah had envisioned, everything Max had worked toward during his months in the wilderness, and everything Diane had rediscovered about her own purpose in life. The pack had proven themselves worthy of the mission they had inherited. Now it was time to continue that mission on an even larger scale, saving lives throughout the region with the same combination of professional skill and miraculous intuition that had just brought Marcus Williams safely home to his family. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning that carried the promise of renewal in every breeze, Diane stood before a crowd of 200 people gathered in the town square for the official dedication of the Sarah Hartwell Memorial Search and Rescue Training Center. The facility, built on land donated by the Miller family, represented everything Sarah had envisioned and more, a place where the bond between humans and animals could be developed to serve the highest purposes of compassion and service. Emily Henderson, now 11 years old and serving as the center's youngest volunteer instructor, approached the podium with the confidence of someone who had discovered her life's calling early. She had spent the winter working with Diane and the Golden Retriever Pack, developing an intuitive understanding of search and rescue techniques that impressed even veteran professionals. "My name is Emily Henderson," she began, her clear voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "And 8 months ago, I was lost in the woods behind my cousin's farm. I spent a night that I thought might be my last, alone and scared, until 6 golden retrievers found me and kept me safe until help arrived." The crowd listened with rapt attention as Emily told her story, her words carrying the weight of lived experience and hard-won wisdom. She spoke about fear transformed into strength, about the bonds that connect all living beings, and about the difference between being rescued and learning to participate in rescuing others. "Ms. Hartwell and her team have taught me that being saved isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. It means you have a responsibility to help save others when your turn comes. That's what this center is really about, teaching people that we're all connected, that we all have a role to play in taking care of each other." Diane watched from the side of the stage, surrounded by the 6 golden retrievers who had become the foundation of the most successful search and rescue unit in the state's history. In the months since Marcus Williams' rescue, they had been deployed to 17 emergency situations, successfully locating 14 missing persons and saving countless lives through their rapid response capabilities. But more importantly, they had begun training new teams of human handlers and dogs, sharing their extraordinary abilities through a program that was attracting attention from search and rescue organizations nationwide. The waiting list for training slots extended 6 months into the future, with applications arriving from professional emergency responders and dedicated volunteers who had heard about the miraculous work being done at the Sarah Hartwell Memorial. Center. Max rested at Diane's feet, his graying muzzle a testament to his years of service, but his eyes still bright with the intelligence and purpose that had driven him through his months in the wilderness and back into her life. The scars he had earned during his solo mission were now badges of honor, visible reminders of the sacrifices required for meaningful service. "I'd like to introduce the person who made all of this possible," Emily continued, gesturing toward Diane. "Ms. Diane Hartwell, director of the Sarah Hartwell Memorial Search and Rescue Training Center, and the woman who taught me that losing someone you love doesn't have to mean losing your purpose in life." Diane approached the podium with the measured pace of someone who had learned to carry grief and joy with equal grace. The crowd's applause was warm and sustained, but she was most moved by the sight of familiar faces in the audience. Marcus Williams and his parents, Tommy Martinez, now 12 years old and serving as a junior volunteer, Emily's parents beaming with pride, and dozens of other families whose lives had been touched by the work of her extraordinary team. "Sarah Hartwell was my daughter," Diane began, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt looking out at the gathered community. "She died 5 years ago while saving the life of a 3-year-old boy she had never met. At the time, I thought her death was a tragedy that ended everything meaningful in my life. I was wrong. She paused, looking down at Max, who raised his head attentively, as if understanding that this moment was important for both of them. Sarah's death wasn't an ending, it was a transformation. Through Max and these remarkable dogs, through Emily, and all the volunteers who have joined our mission, through every successful rescue and every life saved, Sarah's purpose continues. Her love has found new ways to express itself, new hands to work through, new hearts to guide towards service. The crowd listened in respectful silence as Diane shared the lessons she had learned during her journey from grief-stricken isolation back to purposeful engagement with the world. She spoke about the bonds that transcend death, about the responsibility that comes with being rescued, and about the miraculous ways that purpose can survive even the ultimate sacrifice. This center exists because love is stronger than death, because purpose is more powerful than tragedy, and because the connections between all living beings extend far beyond what we can easily understand or explain. Every dog trained here, every handler certified here, every life saved through the work that begins here, honors not just Sarah's memory, but the possibility that each of us carries within us the power to transform loss into hope. As she spoke, Diane noticed that the golden retrievers had arranged themselves in their characteristic protective formation around the podium, not because there was any danger to guard against, but because their instinct for service had evolved to encompass every situation where their presence might provide comfort and support. The formal dedication ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a bronze statue depicting Sarah kneeling beside Max, both of them alert and ready for the next mission. But the real celebration began afterward, as visitors toured the training facilities and watched demonstrations of the extraordinary work being done by the human canine teams that had made the center their headquarters. Emily led a group of children through the obstacle course where new dogs learned to navigate challenging terrain, explaining each piece of equipment with the expertise of someone who had designed many of the training exercises herself. Her natural ability to communicate with both animals and humans had made her invaluable as an instructor, and several universities had already expressed interest in studying her methods. The most important thing to remember, Emily told the children, gathered around her, is that rescue work isn't about being a hero. It's about being willing to help when help is needed, even when it's scary or difficult or dangerous. Max and his pack taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being afraid. As afternoon stretched into evening, the celebration took on the relaxed quality of a community gathering among friends. Families shared picnic meals on the grounds, while children played with the therapy dogs that were part of the center's counseling program. Teenagers who had volunteered as training assistants demonstrated their skills to impress relatives. Adults who had been touched by the center's work shared stories of rescue and recovery, of lives saved and families reunited. Diane found herself standing at the edge of the festivities, watching the scene with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had discovered her true calling after years of searching. Max approached and sat beside her, his presence as comforting now as it had been during their years of working together before Sarah's death. "We did it, didn't we, boy?" she said quietly, scratching behind his ears. "We found our way back to who we were meant to be." Max's tail wagged slowly, and Diane could swear she felt Sarah's presence in the warm spring breeze that rustled through the trees surrounding the training center. Her daughter's laughter seemed to echo in the voices of the children playing with the dogs. Her compassion lived on in every successful rescue. Her vision had become reality through the dedication of people who understood that service to others was the highest form of love. As the sun set over the Sarah Hartwell Memorial Search and Rescue Training Center, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that perfectly matched the coats of the golden retrievers who had made this dream possible, Diane felt a profound sense of completion. Not the ending kind of completion, but the kind that comes when one chapter of life flows seamlessly into the next. carrying forward everything valuable from the past, while embracing new possibilities for the future. The emergency radio on her belt crackled to life. Another call, another opportunity to serve. A hiking party was overdue on Mount Harrison, and weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly. It was exactly the kind of challenge that would require every skill her team had developed, every bond they had forged, every lesson they had learned about working together to save lives. "Looks like we have work to do," Diane said to Max and the pack, who had already begun moving toward the equipment, building where their gear waited in constant readiness. Emily Henderson appeared at her side, automatically falling into step as they prepared for deployment. At 11 years old, she was too young for dangerous rescues, but her role as communications coordinator and pack liaison had become invaluable during complex operations. "The missing hikers have been gone for 6 hours," Emily reported, reading from the emergency dispatch information. Last known position was near the summit trail, but they were planning to take the scenic route down the eastern slope. Weather forecast? Snow and high winds expected before midnight, temperature dropping to dangerous levels. Diane nodded, running through contingency plans as they loaded the rescue vehicles. This was what they had trained for, what Sarah had envisioned, what Max had spent 8 months in the wilderness preparing to accomplish. Every successful rescue validated their mission and honored the sacrifices that had made their work possible. As the convoy of emergency vehicles pulled away from the training center, Diane caught sight of the bronze statue gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. Sarah and Max, forever captured in the moment of alert readiness, watching over all the rescue teams that would carry their legacy forward into the future. The radio chatted with coordination between multiple agencies converging on Mount Harrison. Helicopter pilots reported deteriorating visibility. Ground teams confirmed treacherous trail conditions. Medical personnel stood ready at staging areas, prepared for whatever conditions the rescue teams might encounter. But Diane felt the familiar calm that came with knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she had been called to do, surrounded by the most extraordinary team of partners she could have imagined. Max rested his head on her shoulder from the back seat, offering the comfort and confidence that had sustained her through countless missions. The golden retrievers were alert and ready, their professional demeanor indicating they understood the importance of what lay ahead. 6 months of successful rescues had forged them into a legendary team, but more importantly, they had become a family united by purpose and bound by the unbreakable bonds of shared service. "Whatever we find up there," Diane said to her team as they approached the base of Mount Harrison, "we bring everyone home safely. That's what we do. That's who we are." The storm was intensifying as they began their ascent, but the golden retrievers moved with the supernatural confidence that had become their trademark. They were following scent trails invisible to human senses, navigating terrain that challenged experienced climbers, working as a coordinated unit to locate people who needed their help. Behind them, the lights of the Sarah Hartwell Memorial Search and Rescue Training Center glowed like a beacon in the darkness, a reminder that love indeed transcends death, that purpose survives tragedy, and that the bonds connecting all living beings are stronger than any force that tries to break them. Rescue mission continued into the night, but Diane knew with absolute certainty that they would succeed. They always did. Because some missions are bigger than the individuals who carry them out. Some purposes transcend the boundaries between life and death. And some bonds can never be broken by anything as temporary as mortality. The work continued. The legacy lived on, and somewhere in the storm-swept darkness above them, people who needed saving were about to discover that they were not alone, had never been alone, and would soon be going home to the families who loved them. This was what redemption looked like, not a single moment of triumph, but a lifetime of service, carried forward by every heart willing to love something greater than itself.